Hello, everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodity space. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer: nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the CEO of Power Nickel, a Canadian junior exploration company focusing on developing the high-grade NISC project into Canada's first carbon neutral nickel mine. We're going to be talking about the company itself as well as the nickel market in general. It's Terry Lynch. Great to have you on the show.
Jesse, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I want to start with an overview of the nickel sector because a lot has been going on in the space, and yet I feel that it's an under-discussed commodity. So let's start with the main factors you see currently driving the nickel price, and how do you see the market playing out in the years ahead?
Yeah, it's a complicated space. So let's try and break it down. Right now, geopolitically, there are factors that are driving it. Obviously, the sanctions on the Russians have made the most immediate impact in the last few months, and that's happened obviously for a variety of reasons. That nickel seems to find a way into the market, ultimately. So I'm not sure. I've never been a big fan for sanctions. I don't feel they're highly impactful, but nonetheless, that has moved the futures prices. The nickel market had been, over the last 18 months, I think, shocked by the Indonesian explosion in supply that severely cramped pricing, right, and that moved them into a dominant, like OPEC-like position in the nickel market, and that forced high cost nickel mines like in New Caledonia and in Australia to shutter. And these mines were borderline and troublesome and were money losers and were probably heading for shutting anyway. So they just accelerated the process. If you look at what drives the nickel market, really there's two primary themes, maybe a third one now. I would say urbanization is the biggest theme. So stainless steel is the underbelly of the nickel market. So and that's really tied closely to urbanization. People are moving from agrarian societies to villages to cities, and they're obviously cooking with pots and pans and fridges and stoves and washers and dryers, and that all uses huge amounts of stainless steel. So stainless steel has been one of the safest bets in commodity growth. Really, it was growing at 6% compound annual growth for a number of years. Slowed down obviously with COVID when that happened, but it's right back at it again. So that's sort of the underbelly of the market. And then of course the other big driver has been electrification. So the use of nickels in all the various batteries out there, and whatever one's view of the EV market is, there's certainly going to be more EVs in the future than there is today, and so of course that's a driving number for that EV market. And then I'd say the third thing that unfortunately is reality in this world we're living in is munitions and defense. So a very big impact is nickel. Nickel powders and this sort of thing are driving a lot of defense applications, and so that's another underbelly is supply. So in the short term, we're looking at probably a fairly choppy supply, probably ranging from, I'm thinking, like 14,000 on the low side to 22,000 on the upside, per ton is my guess over the next couple of years, and it'll trade in that range. And then, but I think in the longer term, like if you see yourself out towards 29, 30, 31, as it's moving out that way, then you're going to see a major, I think, supply constraint, and that will lead to higher prices. And then within the nickel market, there's really a number of markets. There's an Asian nickel market, an African nickel market, and a North American nickel market. So you have to look at it that way. And then within nickel itself, you got laterites and sulfides. And within sulfides, you got low grade and high grade. And so there's a lot of nuances to it. In where Power Nickel is focused is in the high grade nickel sulfide in North America. That's in very short supply. So we've always had a good market, and it's been, our stock was misunderstood for a long time, in terms of its value proposition. So it's really only taken off in the last few weeks, really, because of a massive copper discovery. Funnily enough, in the search for more nickel, we made the world's most exciting copper discovery. But yeah, I mean that's our view on the nickel market.
Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into those different kinds and different grades of nickel. You mentioned sulfite and laterite. What are the differences between those? where are they primarily mined, and how can investors kind of wrap their heads around the
Sure.
difference in grades
So
of
the
nickel?
laterites generally occur at surface or near surface, and they're in a different type of rock, really. And their grade tends to be sort of, I would say, maybe zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.7 or so. So not high grade, but not like terrible, and tends to require in order to it usually historically have been used for pig iron, and stainless steel production, stuff like that. And then using HPAL technology, they've been able to create a MHP product from the laterites using a great deal of energy. And it's pretty CO2 intensive nickel and expensive to get there. And that's what the Indonesians are providing for the Chinese battery makers. And it's, I've spent a bunch of time in Indonesia, and I know the Indonesian people well, and they're good people. They want the best for their country. And the challenge they've got, unfortunately, is that the laterite deposits are located on the surface in tropical rainforests. A lot of times on islands. So when you strip mine there, which is the way you have to mine, you create environmental havoc. And it's not like they're wanting to pollute the environment. They're doing everything they can to prevent it, but it's virtually impossible in that type of scenario to not have toxic runoff and not kill a bunch of plants and animals and ultimately poison the water that impacts people downstream. So it's really dark nickel in terms of the environmental cost and the CO2 cost, because generally speaking, most Indonesian nickel plants are powered by coal. So when you think that one of the driving forces behind nickel consumption and is to create batteries so they can have power EVs and empower the whole green initiative, and you're strip mining in the tropical rainforest, I don't know. It's a challenge. So that's the laterite market. There's some laterites in South America, Central America, and then you got the sulfides. Sulfides, generally speaking, in Canada's been known for its high grade nickel sulfide. Like, Sudbury, the home of the nickel, has certainly been a very big producer of that, and huge supplies. And Voisey's Bay, another example of that. So the nickel sulfide is much easier to port to higher value nickel products, a lot less energy needed. So it's considered to be much greener in that respect. And then in Africa, there's some very interesting sources there that I think will have an important role to play. And again, the challenge with some of these sectors and countries is that there's more and more geopolitical risk these days, and I'm sure that's something that has to be factored into the overall supply decisions and stuff.
Great breakdown. I want to touch on a story you actually featured in your company presentation, and that is the Korean battery maker Samsung SDI recently investing $18.5 million in Canada Nickel Company. Is this something we're going to see more of, investment in Canadian nickel projects? Is that a trend that you think we could see moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen it already with Canada Nickel, Sumitomo's investment in Giga Metals. I'm trying to think of the other trading company that invested in FPX. So there's already sort of a trend there, and I think it's going to accelerate. The reason why is pretty simple. All of these companies want to provide their end customers, which is in many cases the North American automotive manufacturers, a IRA compliant source of nickel. What does that mean? What IRA stands for Inflation Reduction Act. That was the big act in the United States to try and transform the economy to be more green, to reduce CO2 impact. And so it provides a bunch of incentives to producers and also to consumers to behave environmentally. So in this case, for the automotive suppliers, if they have a certain degree of North American content in their cars at a certain point in time, now a couple of years out, you start to get full tax credit of like $7,500 per vehicle. So you can imagine if you're Ford and you've got the credit and GM doesn't have the credit, well, that would just cripple GM. So obviously all the manufacturers are very sensitive to this and want to make sure they have compliant batteries. So that's that's driving this whole North American supply concern. And we know that Samsung could have sourced nickel cheaper, in Indonesia, but they obviously chose to make that investment in a it's a this tonnage the product at Canada Nickel is a huge project, like 1 billion tons, but it's low grade, so it's going to take a lot of work to get it to battery stage, shall we say. But they see that that's a supply that they need to try and invest in and make it happen. So I think we'll see several type of investments like that in Canada in the coming months and years.
You mentioned New Caledonia earlier, a major producer of nickel. We did see nickel prices, future prices, jumping for a moment in time after riots in New Caledonia raised supply concerns. I just want to read you this quote from the Financial Times. Nickel prices jumped to the highest level in almost 9 months after political violence in New Caledonia disrupted production in the French overseas territory that holds some of the world's biggest deposits of the mineral. We've seen a lot of jurisdictional risk in the mining sector over the last few years. The Cobre Panama mine when it comes to copper, Niger, obviously, when it comes to uranium. How is the current supply chain for nickel set up, and how important is it to secure more domestic supply in safer jurisdictions?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the very fact that the Inflation Reduction Act and the Critical Mineral Act in Canada both addressed the nickel as a critical mineral suggests that it's in their view something they need to be focused on, generating much more supplies. Geopolitically, unfortunately, we live in these times of great tension, which is very unfortunate. But obviously, the Russian supply is offline for the West at the moment. There's certain challenges to various African supplies in terms of people are reluctant, given some of the geopolitical risks, to put in the capital to get these mines back in development and back in production, or to put them in production in the first place. So all these things make if you have actually a commercially viable mine in North America, you got a really excellent chance of getting financing, getting ground. I mean, the one challenge in North America is the NIMBY problem. Not in my backyard. Talent Metals is a really great deposit in Michigan, Minnesota. They're doing some unbelievable gymnastics to find a way to make that into production, and I hope that they'll be able to do that. We certainly need that nickel in the North American scene, but it's a struggle. I mean, we're blessed in Power Nickel in that we're located in Quebec, and Quebec is probably amongst the best, and in our view, the best mining jurisdiction in the world for critical minerals, and we certainly feel that we'll be well positioned by being there.
Yeah, I want to touch on Quebec as a jurisdiction a little bit later. First, let's shift to discussing Power Nickel specifically, and maybe for those who are unfamiliar with the company, start by giving us an overview.
Yeah, well, of course, with a name like Power Nickel, we started with a nickel, focus, and we certainly maintain it. We've got a very fine nickel sulfide project, high grade, that we posted our initial 43-101, I guess, in December of this year. So 7.1 million tons of about 1.13% nickel EQ. Most of that is nickel, and have some copper and some cobalt, and about a gram of PGMs, platinum group metals. So looks like that's got a ton of legs. We basically it's the ore body is associated with an ultramafic deposit, and other ultramafics of high grade in Canada's history, that we can look at for analogs would be Lynn Lake with 22 million tons and Voisey's Bay is 140 million tons. We always felt we'd be sort of in between there. What's interesting is we stepped out about 5.5 kilometers northeast of our core deposit, and we went and we saw an ultramafic expression at surface, and we drilled it last April, and 60 meters down we hit crazy intersection, 8 meters of almost 8 meters, 7.75 of basically what would amount to about 1 ounce of PGMs, 1.5% copper and some gold, which was a spectacularly rich mineralization. And so unfortunately, it was in the winter target, so it was a bit of a marshy area. We had to drill it when it was frozen, unless you had advanced planning. And so we didn't know, we were looking for nickel, didn't expect to hit this. still, so we ended up basically, following up with our NISC main programs over the summer, expanded to deposit there, posted the 43-101. And then we got back in January of this year in at what we now call the Lion Zone. And this is the one to the northeast. And we basically started drilling, and bang, we started hitting it again. But this time, when the assays came in, what we realized we've hit is a massive copper, PGM, gold, silver zone, very high grade. So it's, I would say probably the most exciting copper discovery in the world at the moment in terms of like grade and size. So it's a super, super exciting zone. And that's what sort of transformed the look, and what it's making us do, or we've been considering it for a while. We think our nickel sulfide project has become a polymetallic deposit, and probably always was a polymetallic deposit. We just didn't know until we actually did more work. And polymetallic deposits are basically the world's most valuable mines. So think of Norilsk in Russia and Plata Reef in South Africa. So these are polymetallic. Just simply means that your core metal, in this case nickel, would be dwarfed in revenue by the value of the other metals. So in our case, copper, platinum, palladium, gold, silver. So that's a happy circumstance, obviously, for a miner to have, because it gives you a much higher revenue per ton. And that's what this business is all about, is generating, massive revenue per ton.
We'll dive a little bit deeper, if you could, to give us some more details on this discovery at the Lion Zone. How does that kind of change the direction of the company? How does it change your plans for the future? And how do you plan to capitalize on it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you make a discovery like that, I mean, it's there's really been nothing quite like it. I had reached out, my son, who's a sharp young CFA, and it's obviously the family's well invested. So he had sent me a video of a really prominent, mine in the polymetallic world, Dr. Steve Beresford. He had been the chief geologist at First Quantum, and then at NMG, and chief geoscientist at IGO, and had a number of great discoveries, and is considered a world thought leader in this space. And I watched the video and I thought, well, God, he's talking about NISC, but of course he doesn't know NISC. And funnily enough, LinkedIn, I've never really had tremendous value from it. Always kept my thing, but I was able to reach out to them through LinkedIn. So now I have to give them full credit. Basically cold call the guy with a text. Send him the assays and of the discovery hole and some of the nickel holes. And he said, "Well, you really might be onto something there." So we started chatting about 8 months or 9 months ago, and he said, "Well, let's see how the follow up goes." And then once we started hitting it, I said, "Steve, we're hitting this," And he said, "Okay, send me the assays." So send the assays, and then you eventually said, "Oh, wow!" He said, "You hit it." So we got him on, did a Zoom call with our VP of Exploration, Ken Winston, and we made our presentation to him. I said, "Look, I don't really have a analogy for you, because it's not like Voisey's Bay because of this, and it's not like this gold mine because of that." And he said, "No," he said, "I got the analogy." He says, "It's like NISC. It's like Norilsk." And I was like, "Wow," And he said, "No," he said, "I'm not saying you got the next Norilsk, but he's saying if you were to find the next Norilsk, it would start like this." So even to have that mentioned is exciting. And of course, we're going to do the work to see just how far we can go with that. So obviously, when Steve's actually joined the advisory team, and he's actively working now. He's coming over. We're going up to the site in a couple of weeks. Spent a couple of weeks there, and the benefit of having those types of mines help you is invaluable. So we've got in the short term. We had drilled down 16 holes down to about 275 meters. And the chute, the chute itself is about 225 meters wide. The core part of it, the really rich part of it's about 100 meters wide. And historically speaking, in that area, in that region on the Archean belt, if your chute is X wide, you'd expect it to be 8 to 10 times length. So there's probably a lot of ore to be discovered, or mineralization to be discovered south of that. So the immediate plan is for us to drill that, and it'll start in a couple of weeks. And we'll be drilling that for the balance of the summer and looking to add, more tonnage. We've had some, crazy copper intersections. Like we announced one last Monday, 15 meters of 9.5% copper equivalent. that preceded ones that were, 14 meters of 12% and 11 meters, 9, and we've had, intersections of over 30% copper, just unheard of to get copper and PGMs like that in such high quantities is never been seen in the world before. So, we've got some very serious and smart mining investors that have jumped in and bought the stock and have told us to look, when you get an anomaly like that in mining, that is like gold. If you'll pardon the pun. But so we're super stoked to follow up on the line zone. Historically, again, we would not expect this to be a onesie. The geological event that probably happened there, we think that, the operating thesis from our scientific team is that the nickel sulfide body 5.5 kilometers away is directly connected to NIST, is to the line zone. So that would obviously be a massive area to work. And the second most likely possibility is that there's another nickel sulfide project that's not like NIST main, but it's close to the line zone, and it's providing it, because obviously within the line zone there's also nickel, so high grade nickel. So there's something that's causing this, and probably we have a hydrothermal activity that's brought up the copper, PGM, gold, silver, and almost like in a geyser-like format, and it just pulses until it runs out of energy, and that's why this thing is super saturated. And the geological event that made that happen over that plate probably just didn't happen over that area. It would have happened over a much broader area, so it's highly likely we'll find many more of these shoots, we think. And this thing is I'm an asymmetric investor. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a geophysicist. I don't mind taking risk, but I want to get paid for the risk I take, and I want to be outsized on my payment. And I think power nickel right now has tremendous asymmetric potential. You're basically, I think we're trading for 20 cents on the dollar of what we've already found, and yet we could find much, much more. And it looks highly likely we will. So that's the exciting part. That's what gets people pumped about mining, right? Is that when you make a discovery, you can go from zero to hero very quickly.
Well, let's circle back to Quebec as a jurisdiction. Why do you think it's potentially the greatest mining jurisdiction in the world right now?
Three big reasons. Number one, they've invested over the years very wisely in infrastructure. So, for example, we're located off of Route North. It's a major 3-lane highway at that point. So you can drive right to the site, so that's killer. Across the road from us is a Hydro-Quebec substation. So we got roads, power right there. We're 8 kilometers outside of the town of Nemaska, which has a regional airport, so people can fly in. It also has got hotels and restaurants, and that's fantastic for supply perspective. The other thing they've done an amazing job of, Quebec, is partnering and educating and mentoring the First Nations, so they can see the benefit of mining, and they make sure that they participate fully in that benefit as a partner. And so the Cree, the James Bay Cree, which is our First Nations partner, are headquartered in Nemaska, and I'm actually off to Nemaska tomorrow, and for meetings with them, and they're great people to work with. They're very business savvy because of their long history with Hydro-Quebec. They're really one of the more progressive First Nations in the country. They've had a long history of business dealings, and so that they want good mining development. There's 4 mines being developed in the 100-kilometer of us, 2 built and 2 being built. So they recognize mining can add a lot to their community, their culture, and allow their young people to get really high-paying jobs and be at home in an environment that still obviously first and foremost protects the environment, make sure it's done in an appropriate way. And then finally, the most compelling reason that Quebec is such a great place to discover a critical mineral mine is its financial incentives are at the top of the world. So we basically, if you look at our stock, financings, we've done several financings, at 50 cents when the stock was at 23. So how did that happen? Well, basically there's a lot of tax credits and financial incentives to invest in exploration. So we get like almost 2, in this case, more than 2 for 1. So what would happen is Quebec-based financial institutions who were acting for high-paying Quebec taxpayers buy for 50 cents, and the very next moment they sell that package for 25 cents to your end use investor. So, for example, last November when my family put in $500,000, and Rob McEwen, the legendary Gold Corp founder, put in $500,000. We basically put $1 million in, but the company got $2 million to work with. So from an investor perspective, you put up half X, yet X is out there de-risking your investment. That's very attractive to investors. But it sort of works all the way around, and it's done to drive obviously exploration in the critical mineral sector in the country. So that's on the exploration side, and ultimately on the development side, same incentives exist. So there you get 30% federal tax credit and up to 25% provincial tax credit. So effectively half of your mining development costs to build the mine and equip it would be paid for by the government. So that makes it a lot more economic to get a project into the ground and developed and producing. So that overall combination of infrastructure, First Nations relations, community relations, and fiscal incentives, and then of course having this amazing, historical, super rich metal history of being very well endowed, and obviously Nisk is another example of that.
You mentioned making a large purchase of shares. The Lynch family holds 20% of the shares in Power Nickel. How important is it for you to have so much skin in the game, and what gives you the confidence to hold that much of the float?
We didn't start there. We basically 3.5 years ago we were at under 10%, and then when we acquired Nisk, we started to increase our stake because I really felt this project had a lot of legs, and I've been pounding the table. We can go back through my history of interviews, and I've been telling people to buy it, from 10 cents, to now, and I'm still telling people to buy, I just see it as an asymmetric bet. I think this thing is going much, much higher, and obviously, we're very close to it. We run a very lean company. We put the money in the ground, and we've got great people, and with super jurisdiction, in a now a polymetallic discovery. So we're buffeted by, if nickel's down, copper's up, PGMs are up, gold is up. This thing is going to make a lot of money, in my view. And so, so while we're, obviously, levered to it, you got to make, I think, big bets on things you can control, and then you have faith in. And Eric Sprott, who's a friend, and he's obviously a precious metal investor, and he's not a current investor of ours, but he, I was talking with Eric on, Save Canadian Mining, some initiatives that we work on together. And so I said, Eric, what's the secret? How did you make your money? And he said, well, you know what? He said, he's an actuary. He said, I've gone back and back tested this. He says, not because of my first investments. It's not the that I get, because of course he gets to see everything. He said that hasn't been the key. He said what's been the key is that when I see round 2 of drilling or round 3, he says I know which ones are going to become mines, and then I'm going 20% the rest of the way, and I just ride them out till they're a mine, because that's when you really pay out. And I thought, well, there's the smartest guy in mining, so maybe listen to him.
Excellent. Well, it's been an awesome conversation, Terry. I will put a link in the description below to the Power Nickel website, as well as social media, so people can learn more about the company. Before I do let you go, do you have any final words on Power Nickel that you think investors should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think I would say, I think a lot of times people forget, right? That they see a chart. We've obviously moved, in the last few weeks from 20 cents to 60 cents or 65 cents or something like that. So they think, oh, I missed it. And yeah, you did miss the first 40-cent move. You don't want to miss the $4 move or the $40 move, which is possible in these situations. And I think we're a better asymmetric bet now, given the discoveries have been revealed, than we were at 20 cents. Yeah, so that would be one point I would make for the investment audience. And obviously, do your own due diligence, check out our assays, check out the PowerPoint on our site, listen to the other technical interviews, etc. But the other thing I would say is that this is going to be a news-driven, entity. We've got a lot of drilling, still more drill results to come. We didn't even touch on CVMR, which is maybe as amongst the most impactful things we're doing is we're doing a feasibility study with an actual nickel refiner that wants to put this mine in production and certainly has the capacity to do so. They've got 18 plants around the world, and so we've got a big report coming out from them very soon. That'll be super, we believe, super positive. So there's some really exciting milestones that are going to be rolled out, and then we're going to be drilling again. So this is it's going to be lots of action on Power Nickel. So don't feel like you missed it. I think it's still very early days, and we'd certainly like to have you on board.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Terry, for coming on the show. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thanks, Desi. Have a great one. Cheers.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.